All right, everybody, we're gonna get started on our second to last session, marketing lessons and what cannabis can learn from wine. And as we were, I'd like to give a little bit of background on all these sessions. This one really came about from, to be honest with you, just some of the observations that I've made myself as we started to explore some of these cannabis events, because we had this wine and weed symposium, and I was sort of curious. I'd never been to, the cannabis industry events, and so kind of out of curiosity, I went and started to check them out, and I was just blown away at some of the creativity on the marketing side, on the packaging side, and not unlike wine, it's incredibly competitive. So how do you stand out? And I thought one of the things on the cannabis side that I guess kind of a luxury, a little bit of a benefit, is that while on the wine side it's like the level of tradition that we have in our industry is great, and it's something I'm super proud to be a part of that industry. But I think in some cases it can be a little bit constraining, and it's a little bit hard sometimes. So we thought, hey, let's talk to some top-rate marketing and design folks and let them talk a little bit about what they're doing and share that with you. So to moderate the session, we've got Kathleen Murphy, who's the Vice President of Innovation and New Business Development at the family Coppola. We already had Corey up here, and we saw how cool some of the things that we're doing, but we thought Kathleen would be perfect to help lead this discussion today. So Kathleen, I'll let you take it from here.
Hello. Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel, Marketing Lessons from Cannabis. What can wine learn, or can it? Is it the other way around, maybe? For the next 45 minutes, we have you, and there isn't going to be a single number. There isn't going to be a graph. We're not even going to talk about legal. We're going to focus on the marketing of cannabis, in particular, packaging. And why packaging? Because of the 4 Ps in marketing, when it comes to an industry that's highly regulated like cannabis, packaging, your product, ends up being probably the single most important lever that a brand can pull. So that's what we're going to focus on. Collectively, we are a group of individuals that have dedicated our careers to marketing, innovation, and design in the alcohol industry and in the cannabis industry and beyond. So with that, I will introduce myself, and then I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. My name is, as I said, Kathleen Murphy. I have about 19 years of experience in the alcohol business, working with mostly the big guys, the Gallo, Constellation, Diageo's of the world. And now I work for Francis Ford Coppola, and I help to help his pet projects come to life. Future-proofing, as you would. It's about establishing new business units outside of wine. So we first started with Great Women's Spirits, which is a super premium line of spirits, and now we have Santa, which is the cannabis business. So that's me. Hand it over to you, Zach.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zach Darling. I'm the Chief Eternal Optimist at the Hybrid Creative. We're a full-service creative agency that was started here in Santa Rosa, California, about 9 years ago. I did my first cannabis design in the year 2000, branded my first hydroponics shop in 2002, and have been deeply immersed in a lot of the kind of evolving different verticals of the cannabis and hydroponics and grow industries. I was raised on an intentional community. Some people call it a hippie commune up in the mountains of Mendocino County in the Emerald Triangle, raised by pot farmers. I got to see the cannabis industry evolve from being a highly prohibited and militaristically enforced industry to the battle that we are essentially reaping the benefits of the victory of now here today. I have an amazing team here in Santa Rosa. We also have an office in Los Angeles as well, and we've had the opportunity to build and grow some of the most successful cannabis brands, especially here in California. About a year ago, my company was acquired by a company called Kushco Holdings, which is the largest ancillary publicly traded cannabis company here in the United States, which has allowed us to expand even more tremendously and grow our vision and grow our agency and step outside of California and start working with multi-state operators, large international LPs, et cetera. So thanks for having me, and I'll pass it over to Ann.
Hello, I am Ann Peltz, and I'm currently the Vice President of Marketing for Left Coast Ventures. We are a strategic cannabis company looking to capture most of the value chain in cannabis. And so we have a few subsidiaries. We have Half Moon Grow, which is 164 acres in Half Moon Bay, where we will be cultivating cannabis. We also have Landsai, which is our distribution company, and also where we are creating new brands. And then we also do hemp CBD. So we have some manufacturing for some topicals where we're building out our hemp CBD brands. And so a few of the brands that we've been working on, we just launched Mind Your Head by Mickey Hart. So if any of you are Grateful Dead fans out there, a few of them maybe, we just launched his brand in May, and that's been a really exciting adventure for us. We just launched a hemp CBD topical brand that's in Sprouts currently called Soul Spring. We also have edibles, vapes, high concentrates. We span the gamut of products at Left Coast Ventures. I'm somewhat newer to cannabis, so I started back in October and actually come from the world of wine, where I started my career at 21 at Eden J. Gallo Winery. I was saying dusting bottles in stores, and then I eventually went up into marketing where I ran Barefoot Wine for about 4 years. And so been involved in wine heavily, started a wine company focusing on new distribution strategies. This ultimately led me to cannabis. It's nice to meet you all today.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Ed Rice. I'm the managing director at Affinity Creative Group. We're a boutique agency on Mare Island. We're participating in the reinvention of Mare Island. It's a pretty exciting place to be right now. We've got 2.5 mansions along Officers Row, and we focus on brand design and package design, retail activation, and digital media and video. I cut my teeth in the industry at a firm called Landor Associates, a global branding and design firm, and had a career there for a long time. And found a smaller environment, and it's a lot more fun. We're focused on wine, spirits, beer, and recently we discovered cannabis. And fortunately, we're not too late to that party. It's a really fun place to be, and look forward to sharing some thoughts and ideas with you all today. Thanks.
All right, on to our first topic of discussion. A reminder that you can submit your questions. I'm reading them as they come in, and I will build them in. We will have some time at the end, hopefully, for some Q&A, but by all means, do fill it in now. So I've asked each of them to come prepared with 2 or 3 brands out there that inspire them or potentially don't necessarily inspire them. So Zach, you're up first.
This is check. There we go. This is one of our treasured clients, Cannacraft, and I believe that the people who are really leading the way in the cannabis industry are the radical innovators. And the kind of innovation that you've seen between the relationship with Lagunitas and Cannacraft has been tremendous. They have a vape line that is using terpenes from hops to where it's a vape experience that tastes like an IPA, and they also have their Lagunitas Hi-Fi Hops product, which is hop water infused with cannabis. These are super successful projects, and they are kind of successfully bridging the world between alcohol and cannabis, which is a very delicate relationship, and it's being very well received by the consumers. I would also say that the fact that Lagunitas is owned by Heineken means that the love affair between Lagunitas and Cannacraft probably has some bigger significant implications as to the kind of interest that's happening here with our local Sonoma County businesses. When we first started this company, we were focused on sustainable ventures. We've worked with solar companies. We built the website for Go Local. We're very deeply focused on sustainable industries. My first company, Greenfield Graphics, in 1997, was the first EPA-certified green graphics company in the nation. So sustainability really is at the root of where we are. And when we were acquired by Kushco, this large carbon footprint distributor of cannabis packaging and child-resistant packaging, we had to ask ourselves if that was a conflict of interest with our values. And we've basically decided that we are going to be better being a loud voice from the inside than a quiet voice from the outside. And I'm happy to say that now Kush is transitioning, in the process of transitioning all of our plastics, child-resistant plastics, to not only biodegradable plastic alternatives, but compostable. That's truly regenerative. That means that the trash in the ground will make the soil in which it decomposes on even richer and better. And that's where things are headed. Cannabis, like any other industry, is a consumer-driven economy and consumer-driven industry, and the consumers have spoken. They want sustainable packaging, and they want it now. They're tired of throwing away a piece of plastic every time they smoke a joint. Additionally, other honorable mentions that I think are important here, on the previous slide there, Sauna Packaging is reclaiming ocean plastic and making child-resistant packages out of reclaimed ocean plastics. And Brother David's, from David Bronner, son of Dr. Bronner's, is working with Patagonia to launch a program called Sun and Earth, which is an amazing certification program that I recommend everybody look into. And then to kind of bring in one that doesn't inspire me, I think there's a big difference between innovation and novelty. And frequently novelty really becomes confused with innovation. There's a lot of really innovative vape products out there. I would say that PAX is pretty innovative. I would definitely say that Dosist is really innovative by putting the dosing into the hands of the consumer. Double barrel, I don't know, 2 intelligent barrels, 1 mighty airflow. You can combine 2 strains at once. For me, this just feels like novelty. And it's interesting to differentiate when you're looking at the different types of products that are hitting the market today.
All right. Is this on? All right. So as you guys can take a look up here, we have Garden Society. And this is not actually a brand of mine, but I am truly inspired by the founders of this company. And so I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about what they're doing that really inspires me and I think the cannabis community. So as you can see, there's Garden Society here. And Aaron and Carly, the founders of this company, are both moms of toddlers. And so they create these cannabis products that occupy the need states that sometimes wine does, right? And so we've come home from a hard day at work, we want to unwind. They have your chocolates, your edibles, but also their pre-rolls. And so their product really speaks to me in that way. Additionally, their packaging, I think, is really distinctive in the cannabis marketplace. It makes it much more approachable for their target consumer using beautiful botanicals, but also the name itself, Garden Society. It just kind of brings cannabis back to, the garden and makes it real and kind of reframes how we think about cannabis. Additionally, it makes me feel like I want to be a part of something, the society, and I'm going to meet a group of people that align with my values. And so that's what's really inspired me about Garden Society, and additionally with the founders back there, that's where the woohoos come from. Additionally, beyond their packaging, what they're doing in terms of their business model, I think is quite innovative and necessary in the cannabis space. And so, as we all know, cannabis, we sell through to wholesale and we go and buy in dispensaries, but they're really looking to really build out the direct-to-consumer market as well as focus on this Gardener educational series. And so anything we can do to target the curious, to remove any friction along that path to purchase is going to be really important. And that's what direct-to-consumer can do. So some people, even though there's some beautiful dispensaries out there, some people just may not want to go to a dispensary, especially their target consumer. So anything we can do to empower kind of the direct-to-consumer movement and just get it to the hands of the consumer at their home is going to be really helpful in growing the cannabis market. And then this one is really kind of, the Gardener Education Series. This one actually really hit home for me, having worked in multi-level marketing, started direct-to-consumer marketing in wine, is this Gardener Education Series. And so oftentimes we can find in wine, it could be somewhat perceived as snobby. I mean, more so back in the day, but there's this, it was shrouded in mystery, right? If you didn't know a lot about wine, you didn't know how to drink it. And so education became increasingly important in wine. And I think the same will hold true for cannabis. It's shrouded in mystery. People are somewhat intimidated by it. So anything we can do to make the consumer feel more comfortable about the product itself, whether it's learning about strains, how to use cannabis, what dose is right for me in an environment in which they're comfortable, is going to be really powerful in the future for moving cannabis and exposing it to new consumers. And that's what they're doing with their Gardener Education Series.
So interestingly, while we were preparing, Kathleen got the group together and we were talking about kind of the evolution of the industry on many levels. And one level is just how the industry is changing quickly and embracing really sound branding and design principles. And this is an example of a client that just is really getting it right. They exhibited a lot of trust when they worked with us. It's a high-end grower in Sebastopol. And this is a sampler package of super high-end buds. And it was an interesting brief. They wanted to really communicate personality and not lose kind of their quirky vibe, but also look professional, quality laden, and really be building a brand. So just a couple points on the package that really brings different principles together. Obviously, a very memorable name, and you talked about Garden Society, that the importance of having a really strong brand name, and naming is very difficult in any category, especially wine, as you know, Kathleen. It's just very difficult, but very pleasing, fun name, very memorable. There's an extractable icon to go along with the very unique letter forms that can be used in other places, marketing materials on the top of the container. It adds an embellishment, a badging device, if you will. There are also elements that are layered. The border detail, the different applications of a line within a line and hash marks subtly communicate the high quality of the product within. And then you'll see some handcrafted cues. There's this elegant little tab on the end that not only provides tamper evidence, but also just implies that there's extra care with the assembly of the package and the product. And then finally, using a really rich color palette, again, conveys quality and an upscale sensibility to the package. You will note that a lot of this technique can be found on the wine shelf and in the wine category. So we're already starting to see a lot of interesting overlap and borrowing of principles between the two categories. Next slide. Thanks. So this is not an Affinity client, but a design done by a young designer, Brooke Crane, very talented individual. And this is a producer in Santa Cruz. And the idea was to get that Santa Cruz surfer vibe across instantly, but not beat the consumer over the head. So if you look at the logo, you've got that Santa Cruz feeling, the letter forms, just by the placement of the icon and the logo, takes you to the beach, but it takes you there in a really appropriate way. There's a nice background pattern that's subtle tone on tone, and a nice clean color coding system to communicate product to product. So I thought this was just a nice, effective design and looks like a very credible product, which of course it is.
All right. Thanks, group. So looking at packaging, all three of you have been intimately involved in the development of cannabis brands and packaging. This is just a very small selection of brands that are out there. You guys have been very busy, obviously, because there's a ton of brands. So with your expertise, I would love for you to take us through a little bit the history of packaging. Back when I was in college, there was one package. It was a baggie. So it has changed. Just a little.
Well, in the early days, what we were seeing was a transformation from a black market into a legitimate market, and there was no regulation. Cannabis has gone from an under-regulated market into an over-regulated market. So the kind of packaging that you would see traditionally in the beginning days was deeply focused on the stoner mentality. There was only one user demographic that people were pointing to for the most part, and it was that typical stoner stereotype. And there was no restrictions to be able to, that were required people to stay away from marketing to children. So you saw a lot of products that were very clearly reaching out to kids. Additionally, with the Gorilla Glue, that's a perfect example of some of the branding and packaging that existed out there before the legal cannabis industry really took hold. This is a brand that was eventually sued by Gorilla Glue and had to pull back. It was actually the inventor of the strain Gorilla Glue that was sued by the glue company and had to desist. So it was the Wild West in the beginning. There was no respect for trademark or intellectual property, and your edibles came in cellophane as a wrapped brownie for the most part. Do you guys want to contribute anything else?
I can go to that.
Okay.
No, I just love the infringement, if you go back.
Yeah.
The Oreo infringement and the
Yep.
Kit Kat infringement.
We weren't going to talk legal in this conversation, as you mentioned, but really I would say the two most exciting and interesting parts of the cannabis industry is the creative and the legal conversation and how they relate, especially when it comes to trademark, intellectual property, and the copyright discussion. It's pretty fascinating. Fortunately, things are changing. And these are some examples of what I consider to be really beautiful examples of where things are going in the cannabis industry. Willie's Reserve has a beautiful indented embossed tin that they're just really a high-class brand through and through. Wild Seed, that's one of our designs from the Hybrid Creative. That's a social justice, purpose-driven brand from up in Humboldt County that give a considerable amount of their proceeds to various social justice causes. Kiva is doing a tremendous job of really kind of constantly setting the bar. Aya is actually a Sonoma County built brand, and they were almost ahead of their times. Their packaging was so beautiful and so amazing at a time where a lot of us hadn't even seen something that beautiful on a package. Cannacraft with Absolute Extracts is always raising the bar, and I would say the one brand that people come to us and sit down at the agency and say, I want to look like this brand, it's Lowell Smokes. Lowell Smokes has really stepped up. I would highly recommend looking into them. They have done a beautiful job of building a fictional brand story, but using their packaging to become one of the absolute industry leaders.
I actually have a question for Zach, just regarding the evolution in packaging, IP infringement aside. Has there been any backlash among like kind of the really core cannabis group with the elevation of packaging, or what's been the response to that, or have you seen anything?
Backlash in how
Which is that core cannabis group, right? There's like a clear cultural identity, right? Yeah. What's been the response to the evolution?
What we're seeing is what happened, in my opinion, was there was an overcompensation. People were so afraid of the Cheech and Chong and High Times magazine stereotypes, and everyone in this room that's been a part of the cannabis industry and everyone that was helping build it was super focused on breaking that stigma and creating something new. So as you can see with this packaging, we've been on a mission to legitimize and sophisticate the industry. But in many ways, there's been some overcompensation from that. And you're seeing that pendulum swing the other direction, because that what we call the weed nerd, the OG cannabis stoner market, they still want to be spoken to, and the brands that stayed with them are doing quite well. So really that pendulum's going to swing for a while. And the thing that we're realizing now, especially with groups like BDS Analytics and Headset that are both here, is that we finally have actionable data to where we can look at users and buying trends and demographics and build custom brands that speak to them directly.
And just to layer on to that, that was what we were trying to do at Curiosity Shop, was to retain some of that vibe, but yet still look very professional and hit the price point. So try to get that balance of the pendulum. So. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move now on to need states. Why do consumers decide to purchase and or consume anything? Right? So we can say that there are certain overlaps where alcohol and cannabis have the right to win in certain need states, but there's also need states where only wine and spirits or beer can and cannabis can. So I would love to open it up to talk about where the wine and cannabis meet and diverge, or where they meet or diverge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, my experience in wine, in anyone in CPG marketing or marketing in general, you always look at need states, right, to identify gaps or white space opportunities for innovation. And, specifically on my time on Barefoot, we realized, there's a lot of consumers that want portability and they maybe want a more refreshing product, so they may forego the wine and get a beer. How do we capture that occasion? So by looking at those need states, we came up with the whole spritzer concept. It was Refresh back then. Now they've done spritzers. And so you'll see some evolution or innovation really happening within need states in wine, and similarly in cannabis. And so when we look at where cannabis and wine meet, it's obviously on social consumption. And so I think it's 68% of cannabis users use it recreationally. And so there's definitely some overlap there. Where they diverge is on the medicinal side. And so when I think about cannabis need states, you have medicinal, you have recreation, but you also have, it's somewhat talked about, but it's almost self-actualization. And that's where you can really express yourself in terms of creativity, You're starting to see cannabis occupy those need states as well. And so when I think about, and we'll get into this a bit, but like how can cannabis learn from wine learn from cannabis? When I'm newer to cannabis, and so when I was evaluating the need states in cannabis and looking at wine, we're starting to see that kind of newer crop of the legal drinking age of consumers. Those Gen Z consumers are drinking less, and they're not as afraid to smoke cannabis or get into cannabis. Those stigmas aren't there. But they're also drinking less because they're much more focused on their health and well-being. They don't want to experience hangovers. They're looking for healthier products. And so I think innovation can happen in wine if we look at those need states that wine may not address. I think alcohol does to some extent, and really align values and preferences in that manner. I think there's some really cool innovation that can happen in that space. But there's definitely a lot to be shared. But I think if we look at those points of divergence, we'll see some innovation.
Yeah, on the sharing front of lessons learned from wine for cannabis and maybe for wine from the cannabis market, you look at the tiering of the market. I mean, you've all worked in the wine category, and when you think there's, 10,000 wineries, I think now, maybe it's more in the U.S., and who knows how many different wine labels are on the shelf, it ultimately gets down to differentiation. So when you look at how do you differentiate one product from another, branding, principles of design, principles of visual communication, and we're seeing the cannabis industry embracing that and also tiering the offerings. Because again, back to need states, sometimes you want to enjoy a product on your own. That's a particular feeling, a particular brand, particular purchase. It may be an extra special occasion. You want something a little fancier, something a little more expensive, something a little bit showier. So that gets back to the tiering level of the quality of the product, how it will be consumed, how it will be packaged, the price point, the investment that you'll make, the statement that you want to make with your friends. So we're seeing a lot of parallels and a lot of embracing of those principles across both categories.
I have a random question. How many people here, when you're standing in the wine aisle, pick your bottle of wine based on the design of the label? That's not nearly as many as I thought there would be in here. The reality that cannabis industry is dealing with is that there's no one single competitor for another brand's competitor. It's not like they're neck and neck against each other as much as it is that everyone's biggest competition is brand noise. It's brand clutter. And if you've been into, dispensaries are getting much more sophisticated and beautiful, but there's still plenty out there that have every single brand vying for people's attention. And when you have multiple need states, now that, especially in states like California and a lot of the western states where we have rec and medical, it used to be that even the rec brands kind of tried to act like a medical brand, and there was this little bit more kind of medicinal experience. But now that things have gone recreational, you'll have somebody that's coming in that has a serious medical condition that's all of a sudden having to wade through all the dab head products to be able to get what they're really looking for. And I think what we're going to start seeing in the near future is really differentiating the need states by the retail experience. A number of different retailers are starting to really invest into having specific kiosks for specific brands where they can have their own bud tenders teaching people about the products there. And I think the exciting place where you're going to see that need state being catered to is in the retail environment.
Just addressing a couple questions that are coming in that were relevant to the packaging as we talk about similarities between wine and weed. A few questions regarding is appellation or source region going to take an increasing role of importance in the development of new brands?
I definitely think appellations are going to take a bit more priority in cannabis. I think we'll start to see a lot of that. Currently, cannabis it's much more difficult than I thought it would be in marketing, but price and potency rule. And in wine, you have so many factors that affect price. The aging of wine, the appellation, right? One vineyard can command 10 times the price of an adjacent vineyard. And we just don't quite have that in cannabis yet. And additionally, we talk about how microclimates can affect the taste of wine. I think we're going to get there as cannabis consumers, doesn't like my voice, right? As cannabis consumers become much more educated on the product. And so when we look at how, the sun may affect a certain profile of cannabis. What terpenes? What are you going to taste? I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that. Currently, it does make it a little bit more difficult to market, like we do with wine, where we can talk about vineyards and appellation and vintages down to the vintage level. We can talk a little bit, we have the winemakers and the cultivators. We have some analogies there. But I think we're going to start to see how a confluence of factors will affect kind of cannabis pricing and cannabis branding, similar to what we see in wine today.
And that's a great point, Ann. And to layer on to that, ultimately, when you think about it, brand building is storytelling, right? I mean, you're really telling the story. So it's another component of storytelling. The wine industry has used it for forever, talking about provenance and climate and terroir. And there's no reason, within legal acceptable standards, that the industry cannot use those same principles. Again, back to Zach's point, it's another area to differentiate. And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of brands out there that you'll all be competing with, and ultimately it's about differentiating.
The appellation conversation is actually one of the more fascinating ones when it comes to the trademark and intellectual property discussion that's happening, because here you have a number of brands that, the Humboldt and the Emerald Triangle and Mendocino County and Sonoma County want to become synonymous with cannabis just the same way that Napa and Sonoma County are synonymous with wine. And we've seen it from French wines. We're doing it here. That level of protection is definitely happening. There's, brands are not able to call themselves a Humboldt or an Emerald Triangle brand in outside regions. And the laws haven't even been put in place, but everybody's so certain that sooner or later they're going to be in place, and they don't want to have to change their name in the future. One of the other challenges that you're seeing with that, though, is because of the growth of the industry and the expansion of the industry. Let's say you have we have many clients that are named Mendo this or Humboldt that. When they're looking at becoming a multi-state brand, now they're limited by the appellation, and they can't ship across state lines. So there's a little bit of a landlock that's happening with the appellation-specific brands. Now, right now, as the industry becomes massive and there's giant mergers and acquisitions and Goliaths that are coming in and consolidation that's happening, it makes it hard for these small appellation-specific brands to survive. But when cannabis tourism kicks in, like wine tourism currently exists, that's when those destination appellation-specific cannabis grows and farms are going to become much stronger. That's when the power will come back to the boutique farmer, in my opinion.
Jared, we're counting on you. All right, so Ed, you brought up storytelling, which is a nice segue into the next segment. We have the product, we probably have the price in there. We know that we can sell dispensaries, some DTC, but in an industry like cannabis, which is so highly regulated, you can't talk to your consumer. You really have your hands tied when it comes to reaching your end consumer. It also requires a lot of innovation, a lot of thinking outside of the box to reach your end consumer. So we'd love to hear about some examples of brands or companies that are doing things to, in limited budgets, to crack out and be able to communicate and storytell with consumers.
My favorite right now is something that recently happened, a company called Acreage. They tried to put a medical marijuana advertisement on the Super Bowl, and CBS turned them down. And by their failed attempt, it was one of the most remarkable marketing efforts and disruptive and innovative marketing efforts that we've seen so far. 2 weeks later, at the Cush office, we met with the CMO of Acreage, and 2 weeks after they had posted that, they had already received 2 billion impressions just for the fact that they had tried. So yes, it's highly regulated. You can't run Google ads. You can't. Your Facebook and your Instagram can get shut down easily. Those channels are starting to open up, but finding ways to differentiate and as I say, find your zag in a world of zigs. Or Marty Neumeier said it in his great book. But find that zag, find that place in which you can not just differentiate, but radically differentiate. And there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Like with any marketing initiative, finding a way to generate earned media is really, I think, a great avenue for cannabis, especially since it is so hard to talk to our consumers. And so when we talk about working within a regulated industry, I think it does ignite some creativity in terms of how we find ways to talk to our consumers. And similar in wine, there's a few things I think, kind of tenets that I live by in cannabis and that I'm currently working on. But at the end of the day, I am hoping to get other people to do my talking and evangelize the brand. And so the way to do that is to create relevant content, perhaps, that they'll want to go out and share or talk to other people about. Thank you. Maybe doesn't like the high-pitched voice over here. I know, something's going on. So creating content that people want to share, I think, is incredibly important. Also creating what I like to call tangentially related assets. And so is there something, like Garden Society has a podcast, right? It's getting the word out there about cannabis and their brand, but in a very kind of tangentially related way, right? It's not out there like talking about specifically about their cannabis, but they're talking about what cannabis may do for consumers and their experiences with it. And so creating assets that allow you to go out and market and talk about your wine in a very kind of not so obvious way. Another way to look at it is to use ambassadors. And so I think influencer marketing, I know it's kind of the hype today, but really at the end of the day, cannabis still can't promote on Facebook or Instagram, even hemp CBD, believe it or not, that even after the signing of the Farm Bill, we can go and post and we can do things that way. There's some really strict rules on what we can do there, but we actually can't advertise CBD or cannabis. And so the only way to really do it is to hire influencers or get influencers to go out there and talk about and share the word about your product. And so those are a few creative ways that we're finding in cannabis that's working in marketing. And just one thing to talk about too, like in addition to storytelling about the brand, and we found that to be really successful with Mind Your Head and Mickey Hart, using kind of a strain Chem Dog and how it's so authentic to the Grateful Dead lore. Chem Dog was founded in the Indiana parking lot, Shakedown Street, in 1991 at one of the Grateful Dead shows. And this guy named Ken Dog in Massachusetts bought some really good weed off some guys from Colorado, and Chem Dog was born. And so finding those stories to tell are really, really powerful because people can relate to that. But also when we're talking about cannabis, one way to talk to our consumers in a relevant way is through education, not necessarily selling our product, but I think education is going to be critical moving forward in cannabis as we try to get those acceptors into users as well.
All great points. I think if you can build a brand, create a brand that has a certain cool factor, a mystique to it, people will embrace it, and you'll earn that media. You'll generate brand buzz. Best marketing in the world is word of mouth marketing, especially when you can't go public or you have challenges going public. There's other types of guerrilla marketing, and maybe Zach can speak more to this because I'm personally in admiration of what Lagunitas has done with CannaCraft, because it gives you the impression Lagunitas is in the business, but they're actually selling hop water to another company. So they're in the game, but yet they're still following the legal boundaries, which I personally find really clever. Any comments on that partnership?
I would definitely agree that that's that cool factor that you're talking about. Our head of marketing director and strategy director Amanda's looking at me right now, and I know what she wants me to say. Content. That getting just clicks and followers is one thing, but creating that dynamic, purpose-driven story that is going to teach people about the farm, teach people about the people behind the business. People love the product, they love the packaging, but the difference between having a customer and having a loyal fan is when they know your story. There's Mara from Aunt Zelda's right over there. She's done a tremendous job of telling the story, and people are connected with the work that she does as a human, not just the brand and the products that she produces themselves, and that's a huge part of the success behind that. And that's a lot of the work that we do at the Hybrid Creative. We like making pretty looking work, but really we want to build the story behind it, and that's what makes the loyal fans. That's what makes them stay with you. Another great example of that, I would say, is Papa and Barkley. Papa and Barkley. So I'm in another universe. I'm DJ, and I'm a resident DJ for Wanderlust Festival, and I tour around the country and Canada with these yoga festivals, right? All the yoga festivals along the West Coast, Papa and Barkley has a free CBD massage booth set up there. And there's a line going down the hall, and people can't wait to go and get that free CBD massage. And while they're getting that massage, they are getting educated about CBD, the benefits of CBD, and they're bonding with the product. The marketing director for Papa's and Barkley, I got to see her speak, and her philosophy is meet the consumers where they are. Find them before they've ever even walked into that retail environment. And create that story and that bond with them, so when they walk into that dispensary that's full of a zillion other brands, they're not just window shopping, deciding which one's the prettiest that they want to buy. They're not like buying the wine based on the label. They're walking in there already in mind, I want Papa's and Barkley, and that's what I'm gonna pick up. And that's really some of the key to some of the most effective cannabis marketing out there.
Excellent answer. And I kind of want to be you when I grow up. I want to be a DJ. All right, we have 4 minutes. So I want to wrap it up with why we came here. The title of the panel, What Can Wine Learn from Cannabis? Any takers?
I just had 2 points, and I think I touched on them a bit earlier, but I think just continue to innovate by appealing to trends and preferences with the changing market. I think understanding where those need states exist that wine doesn't currently occupy is going to be a huge driver for innovation. And secondly, just don't be afraid to break with tradition where allowable, right? Winery is so entrenched in tradition, which is great, and it's for better or for worse. I think I love the tradition of wine. I still enjoy a great Bordeaux, but don't be afraid to break with tradition where you have permission to do so.
I would layer onto that. Completely agree. And the wine industry, pretty conservative industry, and look how long it took wine to get into cans, right? I mean, you'd think that'd be a no-brainer, right? And there are reasons for that, some technical reasons as well. But when you think about it, the wine industry has been very, very traditional, starting to change. I think if you look at cannabis, they're not afraid of change at all. They're just like maybe responding too quickly, but really being responsive to trends in the market and what's happening. So I think wine could learn a lot by just looking at the nimbleness that you see in the cannabis category. On the converse, I touched on it earlier, just looking at ways to differentiate your products, your brand, building your brand, and then stratifying the market with tiering strategies to have a good, better, best line, and to maximize your margins where you can.
Any major lessons that you'd like to share?
I don't know. I'm way less in the wine industry than I am in the cannabis industry. I see there being a lot of parallels as far as being a disrupted industry and the days of prohibition, alcohol prohibition and cannabis prohibition. There's plenty of parallels historically as how those things have happened, and you've seen a lot of alcohol brands, come out of that era stronger. And I believe cannabis was so tired of being under prohibition that it's back with a vengeance, and it's pretty intense. But because the cannabis industry has been in a black market for so long, it became a circle of trust. It became a family. At least the OG cannabis growers, maybe not some of the newer multi-state operators that are coming in to just acquire, but the heart, and us being in the heartland of cannabis, the heart of cannabis was a lot of cooperation, a lot of trust, and a lot of family. And I call it cooperation. And so there's a certain amount of support that you see within one cannabis brand to another, even though they might be competing for the same consumers. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the cannabis industry. I'm not certain how fierce wine brands are with each other, but I think for cannabis and wine to cooperate and work together and create diverse farming practices, or maybe support some areas where cannabis farmers can actually grow in small rural residential areas here in Sonoma County, which is lame that they can't anymore. There's areas in which the wine industry can ease up and trust and cooperate a little bit more with the weed industry.
All right, not being in the wine world, that was a great answer. All right, so I think we've pretty much answered all the questions that were here. There were a couple of legal specific ones. I say, Omar, Go find Omar and ask those questions. That's or Joe. There is one final panel after this one, so it's women, wine, and weed. There's a 15-minute break, but please come back for the final session.